got my laces tied. My trusty podcast by my side. If you wanna talk fun, it's the place to be. Yeah, it's the drop, D-R-O-P.
All right, we are bringing you all the way from Kenya. We had an experience recently going over there and visiting, and I met Toby, who is with Shoe4Africa, and Toby's story really moved me, and to the point where I thought I was getting one thing out of my trip to Africa, and it turned out to be an eye-opener to something I wasn't expecting to experience. So, Toby, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
So, Toby, you have an interesting story. You ended up starting a charity. Can you start me from the very beginning? You told me a story about the beach, and I'd love for people to understand why you have a passion about Africa and what's going on over there. So if you could just kind of give a recap of that story for our audience, that'd be great.
Sure. What happened was I was a runner in the 1990s, and it was the winter time. And my friend told me, let's go to Kenya for the warm weather training. And so off we went, except he didn't go. I turned up in the airport in Nairobi airport by myself. And worse yet, all my luggage didn't arrive. So I stuck no luggage in Nairobi airport.
Familiar.
And he was an Irish Olympian, Noel, and he told me, leave your wallet behind. He said, I know all the Kenyan runners. I'm going to introduce you to everybody. You know, I didn't know anybody. And so I was stuck in Nairobi airport thinking, like, what do I do? So I asked the taxi driver, just don't take me to the city center because I'm a runner. I want to be on the outskirts. So he took me to the place where Karen Blixen actually lived and Out of Africa was filmed. It's a place called Ngong. And it's a famous place here in Kenya because that's where the armed forces, the Navy and the Air Force used to train. I never knew all of this. So I go there and I find the hotel. The hotel is very basic. No running water, a junior-sized bed, wooden bed, very uncomfortable, and mosquitoes. I thought mosquitoes lived in the jungle or in the forest, but not in hotel rooms. So I got bitten badly and I hadn't got any malaria medicine or anything, so I thought I was going to die of the Black Plague. And I thought the best thing to do is get out of the hotel room and go for a run. And I just ran in my street clothes because I thought, if I don't have any kit, maybe I just go back to the airport, and if they can't find my luggage, I'm going back to Sweden where I used to live. And at that time I was sponsored by Nike, so it was no worry, I would just go home and get more kit, but then leave Africa behind. So I went running up the road, and you've seen the matatus in Kenya, these little minibuses where everybody jumps in and they take you for 20 cents as far as you want to go. So I was running up the road and they thought I was running after the matatus. So all these matatus stopped. And with my bright red face, because I'd come from the Swedish winter until the Kenyan summer, I was telling people, no, I'm an athlete. And they were laughing so much. You, a runner? And then the next matatu would come. It was a horrible, horrible run. So I was just about to turn back to get back to the hotel. And by the grace of God, the best luck that happened, the national team ran across the road about 100 meters up in front of me. So I sprinted to catch them up. And for about 2 kilometers, they didn't even say anything. I was just running on the back of the group, but at least nobody was teasing me anymore. And then we stopped outside these massive big circus tents. And at these circus tents, there was about 500 runners milling around. And they were telling us, come and stay, come and train, come and train with me. And I was looking around and it was like the NBA Hall of Fame because I saw Paul Tergat, the 5-time world cross-country champion. I saw Moses Tanui, who was then the world champion and the only man to run under the hour in the half marathon. And they were saying, and come and train, come and live with us, stay. So I did. So that was my kind of introduction to Kenyan running.
Well, I mean, that's kind of like serendipitous, but it continues on. And when did you come up with the name for Shoe4Africa? Because originally, I thought you were going to be someone that was looking for donations to get shoes over to the runners, but that's not really the case.
Correct. And yeah, it's a bad name in a way for the charity. And that was very true. Yes. What happened was on that training camp, I ended up writing a book. called Train Hard, Win Easy. And it became a bestseller because nobody else was writing books about Kenyan running in the 90s. And, and those were the days where we didn't really have the internet. So nobody really knew how the Kenyans won. So I was kind of the revealer of the training methods. And I'd read many kind of magazine articles, which were just ridiculous. I mean, the journalist had believed the runner. Whereas me, I was training all the sessions. So I was just transcribing what I actually did. So the book published by Track and Field News, and it did really good straight away. And then they asked me to bring out a new edition because it'd gone into print a few times and it was now getting outdated. So I went to Africa over the millennium to go and write the book. I went to train with the Kenyans again. But then on the 29th of December, 1999, I was running along the beach. It was the most beautiful run because dolphins were running by my side. It was by the Indian Ocean. And on the side, there was a grove of coconut trees. And out of the grove, two men came walking towards me. And as you know yourself, everybody's so friendly in Africa. I presume they were just coming up to say, Habari, how are you, blah, blah, blah. So I stopped, which I hate to do in the middle of a training run. I really hate to do that. And when they were about 1 meter away from them, one of them, he had a loose-fitting jacket. He put his hand inside and he pulled out a machete and came down on my head, which I didn't expect. But luckily, at the last possible moment, I put my hand like this to stop. And I don't know if you can see, there's a scar that goes kind of from here and goes across down to here. That's where the machete came down. But unfortunately, the other one had a baseball bat. And so as I crouch now with this, the other one swung the baseball bat and cracked my skull open. So I fell down on the sand and then I blacked out. But I woke up about, God knows, 2 minutes, 3 minutes later because they'd stolen my watch, they'd stolen my sunglasses, and now they were trying to untie the lace on my right shoe. And I am very bad. I'm in baby class with Swahili, but I could understand the word dead meat, and they were referring to me. So I thought, okay, they think I'm dead. Maybe it's best just to lie here.
Oh, geez.
But the viciousness that they had attacked me, I jumped up and started fighting. So I'm fighting with the guy with the machete. The other guy is hitting me with the baseball bat along the back. And then I managed, using my tallness, I'm 6'2", and he was about 5'8". I managed to knock into him, and he dropped the machete. So I picked up the machete now, and I was the aggressor. Now I was saying, okay, you want the shoe, come and get it. And they were conversing, and then saying, well, listen, we have one shoe, you have the other shoe, so give us it. And I said, no, the shoes are mine. And they said, well, if you use that logic, give us a knife, because the knife belongs to us. And I was like, this is a robbery. I can't be. So long story short, I retained my one shoe, and that is the name of how Shoe4Africa, it was that story that gave the name to the organization.
Which is interesting. It would seem traumatic, and most people would say, okay, I'm done with this country. I'm out. I'll probably never go back. You seem to have found your way back, but not only back in a way that maybe you wanted to run with the Kenyans or whatever, but you came back because it seems like you have a love actually for the people and E10 and Kenya itself.
Well, funny enough, after this happened, I went back to New York and I got the award for being the New York Roadrunners, New York City Marathon Elite Comeback Runner of the Year. And there was a press conference in the Tavern on the Green. And a journalist stood up and said, wow, I bet you'll never go back to Africa. And I was like, well, actually, I'm going back in 2 weeks. It hadn't even processed in my mind. And I said, well, this could have happened here in New York. And funnily enough, 13 years on, I did have a similar accident in New York. So, my point was it can happen anywhere. And one of the first things I did was I collected 7,000 pairs of shoes, and I went and dumped them on the island of Zanzibar where I was beaten up. And because I thought, well, if they're that desperate for shoes, if we actually saturate the market, maybe there's going to be less vicious attacks. It's circumstance. You and I, who knows if we were born into dire poverty in Africa, what we would do if we saw a skinny white person running along the beach with an expensive pair of Nike shoes on his feet. Maybe we'd be robbers too. You can't say.
Yeah. But the thing is that what I'm getting at is instead of being jaded or malice or having like taking that experience and using it as a negative experience in life. You turned it into something positive. And that kind of brings us to where we were at your school in E10. And I'll tell you, when I got to Kenya, I don't know what I was expecting. First off, it's a beautiful country. As far as where we were near the Rift Valley, it's just gorgeous. It kind of almost reminded me of Napa Valley. There's even eucalyptus trees. There's like that crisp air. It's gorgeous country. Now, the thing about that is it's juxtaposed with some pretty extreme poverty. And when I was going over to Kenya, I thought what I was going to get out of the experience was I was going to get to see these elite runners, and I was going to get to know like what they're doing over there, see the running, get to experience running on some of the same roads and trails. And pretty much, that was going to be my experience. And I think that one of the pivotal things that happened was we were taken to your school and you walked us through some stuff that really, it opened my eyes to some degree. And not only that, but it changed my experience of visiting Kenya. And if you could just walk through a little bit of, you don't have a traditional charity where there's a board and there's like process to donate and to get through. If you can kind of explain how Shoe4Africa works and how this school works and how you're kind of like reactionary, but quickly to the needs of the people, I would love to share that with the audience.
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, to be honest, I hated charities. And that came from when I was younger. I was donating to a charity, British charity, famous charity. And I found out that they had board retreats in the Bahamas. And my donations were a pittance. But I kind of did the maths and thought, like, everything I've given is not going to pay for one ticket. And why on earth are they having a board retreat in the Bahamas when they're all based in England? So I was not interested in charities. And then when I first came over to Kenya, I saw a lot of NGOs. And what they would do is you have teams of people sitting, waiting for donations to arrive. So you're paying a full staff. The staff were sitting around. There was a whole organization in another country, overheads, all that. They raised the money, they put it in an envelope, whatever, sent it over to Africa. And then the Africans received that donation. They set about. And I thought, if that was a business, that would go completely out of business straight away. I mean, you got two CEOs, you got two offices, so I was not interested in doing a charity. But then when I was in New York, a lot of people heard what I was doing with these shoes, sending over to Africa, and said, can we help? And I was like, sure, but, I don't really need money. But, if you want to give me postage to help, that's all we need. But more and more people started to say, become a 501c3. And they said, also, we can get benefits from giving you money. So they were kind of imploring me, start this so we get our benefits, but we help you also. And I thought, okay, why not? But I then said, everyone's donation has to go 100% towards the project. Because I just felt uncomfortable. Going over to Africa and doing charity work, that's, I should be paying to do that instead of being paid. So I worked for free for a long, long time without taking a salary. And 100% people's donations just go directly to the project. And I did that because I woke up at 5 a.m. and I'd do coaching inside Central Park up until 9 o'clock. And then I'd work from Shoe4Africa from 9 till 5 p.m. And then I'd go back coaching into the evenings. And then I was a writer also. I was writing for, magazines like Runner's World and Running Times. So I could do this kind of part-time. But my passion, like you say, you go to Kenya and you see these people and you think talent is there, but opportunity is not. So I live in New York. Opportunity is everywhere. Can I just kind of balance in the seesaw and bring some of the opportunities over to the most deserving people?
But it's not just the opportunity. So when we looked at the school, some of the stories that we were hearing when we visited. So we had been traveling around, and one of the things that we did for the day was pop by the Shoe4Africa. It's not really a school, but like activity center or something. Yeah, for boys and girls. And you kind of told us the story about how even the school is a place where these kids are getting opportunity, but they're also getting food. They're also getting education as far as social education, not so much academic. And even to the point where like the story where you told us about the way that food works in the households. If you could just give us a little background on that, I could rephrase what you told me, but I didn't. I want to hear it from you as far as like what happens at this center and why you started it.
Well, first, I have built 6 public schools, and what I do is I go into an area, and a very remote area, which is away from any of the towns, and I find an athlete in that area who's really achieved through sport and education, and then I build a school. For instance, like Janet Jepkoski, the world champion in the 800 meters, was one example, and then Mary Keitan, who's won the New York City Marathon 4 times and the London Marathon 3 times. So Mary didn't put on a pair of shoes till she was 15 years old. And she grew up in a very, very poor area. She had to run 10 kilometers in the morning to get to school. So you can say that gave her the running talent. But so what we did is we went to that area and we built a school in that area. But I told the pupils, I said, look, you're lucky. You've got shoes on your feet. When Mary was your age, she was also eating the same food as you in this same area, trying to change her life. And when Mary was 14, some talent scouts wanted to pull her out of school and take her to Europe for racing. But luckily, one of the elite athletes called Lynn, I think, said to her, no, Mary, people will always take advantage of you in life unless you finish secondary school. So Mary was exactly the person that we want to then take to the other school kids and say, if you get an agent saying, hey, you're a great runner, come to Europe, make sure you finish your schooling, because running it should be an added part of your life. It shouldn't be anything. So we did those schools, but then, so I've done 6 schools, and I thought, am I really making the biggest impact? And you met Brother Colm, incredible, charismatic Irishman in Iten. And Brother Colm, I lived in his back garden when I first went to Iten for 3 months. So we became very good friends. And I asked Brother Colm, should I build another school or is there another way? And he said, well, you've built your Boys and Girls Club, which is, as you see, is this drop-in center for all the kids in town to come and get the nutrition, can get the education, can get the meeting. We have all experts. We had bankers coming last week, coming to talk to them. We had you guys coming to talk to inspire them, to open their minds and their creativity. But next door, we decided to build a porridge club because we found out the reason why the education is so low, and with Brother Colm's guidance, he was pushing with this, is because kids are going to school in Kenya with no food. So the night before, they have a very small portion of greens like kale, and then the ugali, which I'm sure you tasted. But nutritionally wise, that's about 150, 200, 300 calories at the most. And they're not getting bumper-sized portions. These are families in abject poverty. So they're going to bed hungry. They're waking up in the morning. The parents are saying, you just go to school, when they're asking for breakfast. So 80% of the kids in public schools are not eating breakfast in the Iten region when they're going to school. So you imagine how many hours from 7 in the morning when they first arrive at school up until 1 o'clock when they get some lunch. Are they really learning? They're not. Any of the sports lessons, they don't have that energy. So I called up, I have a lot of friends who are top runners in Kenya now. And I was asking them all, like Benson Kipruto, the one who ran 2:02 last year. And Benson was telling me, yes, I was hungry at school. It was horrible. I didn't feel comfortable in the classrooms. So I thought if I build this porridge club and give the nutrition, then we're actually doing something, because the parents, a lot of parents now in Iten, they're so happy because we have this club, we're giving them all kits, we're giving them jackets, giving them clothes, we're giving them money. Last week, we all gave them money to have spending in the market to go and buy presents for themselves. So everybody loves this club. But a lot of the parents are saying one of the best things you're doing is actually giving them some good nutrition too, because, we live in poverty. We're giving them 1 meal a day, and we know it's not enough for the mind to be able to study afterwards. I've also built a hospital.
That's the interesting thing to me, though, is that, like I said, at first you think Shoe4Africa and you brought shoes over and you're like, okay, here's another issue. People aren't getting proper diet. Let's start a porridge club where, to me, I wouldn't even think about this issue, but you were telling me that the family dynamic, the way that it's set up, it's still an adult dominated patriarchy where the male in the house is going to eat first. And if there's resources, it trickles finally down. and that in this particular case, the women are usually the last in line to benefit from any resources the family has. So you saw that, you were able to quickly act upon that, and you said something like 15 cents a day was able to provide the porridge, and you started getting chickens to lay the eggs so that they would have a protein mixed with that, just to give them the basic building block of starting the day off, you know, at a baseline. That's the kind of thing that I think that was fascinating about hearing your story. And I know that you're going to go in next and talk to us about the hospital, but like, even before we get there, in your club, you had two areas, and you were telling me that you split the boys and girls sometimes, and you were able to do somewhat of an education for the girls and letting them know certain things that aren't maybe talked about in Kenya. Like, when you identify these problems, how are you identifying the problems, and then how are you finding the solution? And then, because you don't have a board, it also seems like you're able to act quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we have a board to look after the financials in New York and just over the oversight. But in America on the ground, I mean, in Kenya on the ground, yeah, I'm just making the decisions by listening to the people. But you've made a good point there. And you heard the stories like Agnes Tirop, who was stabbed to death, the world champion in E10. And then there was the other girl shortly after, I'd forgotten her name, Dorcas, I think. And then recently, last year, a month after the Olympics, there was Rebecca, who was burnt alive. And I saw Rebecca was treated in the hospital right next to mine, 50 meters away from where my office is. And I have never seen a human being who is still alive who looked so bad. And this domestic violence against women and children is absolutely horrible. And I remember when Agnes was being buried at her funeral, and the talk was in Kenya, oh, wow, we have a new thing here. We have to watch out, and absolute rubbish. Everybody in Iten knew that Agnes's husband was a bad man. Everybody. And today he's walking free on the streets. I mean, it's just an absolute joke. For a woman in Kenya, it's very, very tough. And so we want to start with the girls, build up a new generation of strong girls who say, no, this is wrong. And almost like in America, where you have the speaking out Me Too movement, we don't have that in Kenya yet. We don't have the women who it's happening to having the courage, because it's such a stigma in the communities. So what we want to do is, it was supposed to actually just be a girls' club. But again, the community said, listen, you Americans, you have all this, looking after the girl child. What about our boys? There's kind of like a backlash against the whole girl power and thing. So we decided what we'll do is, the boys, as you saw, they love to play basketball. We have a basketball hoop, and then we have the table tennis table. So we separate them into their side of the building, and then we have that corridor. And then the other side, we have the tables where we sit down with the girls, and we're going to teach them, skills about empowerment. And we bring in strong female personalities, like the president of Kenya. He sent his women's advisor, Shige, a lady, to come and actually talk to the kids. And then when we brought the bankers from Eldoret to come and talk to the kids, we picked a bank that had only female leadership. And now the little girls were sitting there going like, wow, in Iten, it's a very male-orientated society. They didn't even think that women could be leaders. So our club is, craftily, we're making it into a girls' empowerment group, but we're not publicizing to the community because we don't want the backlash that, hey, listen, yes, you again are going to lift up the women and ignore the men. Because you're right, it's a terrible problem that people talk about it when something happens. And then why do we have now the man who stabbed Agnes out on the streets? He paid a $3,000 bond for murder. And I remember the president, Kenyatta at the time, saying, justice is going to be done. We're going to follow this to the letter of the law and make sure that now he's walking free. Nobody knows where he is. It's, something has to change. And I thought, instead of changing with the athletes who are, running now, let's go instead to the younger generation and change their mindset. In the same way, like I was saying, when you go to the army, you don't get the gun on day number 1. You get the training before you go out to the world. You do 6 months of boot camp. So we're trying to prepare them for those kind of circumstances before they appear.
Do you feel like there's danger for you to be doing this? Like you could get backlash from the community?
No, I mean, I remember when I first started bringing shoes to Kenya. And then I got like a backlash from the community because they were convinced I was making money from doing this. And I was telling them, please tell me, how am I making money from spending money, putting them in boxes in New York City, taking them up to the post office, sending them over to Kenya, and then giving them out for free? But people were like, no, 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 no. There must be some, some way you're making, otherwise you wouldn't be doing this. So in the community now, I think because I've been here such a long time, and they look at me as being more African than African in some ways. So I think now, I've lived here on and off for 25 years, and I've always integrated with the people. I have very, very few friends who are not Kenyans. I socialize all the time, every day. I'm dealing 100% with Kenyans.
I said your wife is Kenyan as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's also, so yeah. So I feel like they accept me as, far more than they would for somebody who's coming in. And many charities, you see the charity leader when you break ground, and then you see the charity leader when you cut the ribbon. But, I'm there every single day at the projects. I'm there, talking this out, sorting these problems out, buying the bags of sand, negotiating. So I think now they've realized, okay, this is somebody who's trying to do it for the good of Kenya. He's not in it for, maybe like when I first came to Kenya, they thought, okay, he has an ulterior motive. Now they're saying, okay, you built a national hospital, you built 6 schools, why haven't you built yourself a house? So that's the question they're now saying, instead of before when they were saying, no, you're coming here to grab something from us.
So you brought up the hospital. So this is another time where, like, when you were giving us, I was like, how does this guy doing all of this stuff? It's like, okay, he's bringing shoes, he's building, activity centers, he's building schools, and he saw that the kids, you were talking about the cancer rate in the U.S. versus Kenya. Go into that a little bit and then explain to us how, like, are the rest of us making our own roadblocks and you just don't see them and you're a man of action? Like, how does this happen?
Yeah, and to be honest, I never in my life dreamed that I would have built a hospital. I had absolutely zero plans to until the morning of March the 17th, 2008. And I'd been living in Kenya during the political clashes, which was a very mini Rwanda. But you had the 2 tribes, you had the Kalenjin and then the Kikuyus, going against each other with machetes. And of course, I was stuck in the middle in Eldoret. And we couldn't drive from Iten. There were roadblocks. And I got caught in the roadblock one time. They tried to drag me out and put a noose around my neck unless I gave money to the rebels. It was awful. I mean, people were being murdered with machetes. And then a church was burnt with 35 to 50 women in Eldoret. They herded the women and children into the church. They poured gasoline on top. And this blew my mind. I thought, I'm living in a place where this is not the place that I'm living in. I said, this is the most nice, kind, wonderful people. How on earth has this suddenly happened? So I was determined then to try and find out. And so I took, Claudio is a very good friend of mine. He's like one of the top runners for Sebastian Sawi, for instance, and all these runners. He has all the top runners. So he had a very big Land Cruiser. I borrowed his Land Cruiser and I drove searching for this church to see, what was the catalyst for all this. And I found a man who had actually been in the church, very close to the church. And he took me to the ruins. And then I met a lady whose child was burnt alive inside the church. She'd actually thrown the child, 3 years old, out of the church. And then they'd thrown the child back in. And the child had burnt. And I was telling her, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to help. Can I give you a hug? Blah, blah. What do you want money? And she looked at me and she said, there's a meaning why this happened. And for me, it struck me because when I was attacked in Africa 8 years before, and after 2 days, I had yellow pus coming out of my skull because I wasn't able to get proper medical care. Then I managed to find a doctor who was going to give me antibiotics. And he told me the same thing. He said, there's a meaning why you came to Africa. So here, and it's for me to hear when I have something bad like being attacked with a machete and a baseball bat, there's a meaning. I didn't want to hear that sentence. I knew they were stealing my nice, beautiful Nikes. That was the meaning. But he was saying, no, there's a meaning why you came here. And now this lady is telling me there's a meaning why you came to Africa. I mean, why my child died in this way. I drove into town, and I used to train with this guy called Moses Tanui, I think I told you, and he won the Boston Marathon, the 1996 100th edition. And so I went to go and see him because he had built a nice, fancy restaurant in the center of Eldoret. And I was hoping to see him to tell him, like, I've just had this crazy story. And instead, a Dutch friend of mine came in, and he told me, you'd helped another kid in the hospital that was burnt in this church. So he said, I also thought that I wanted to help, with a $200 gift or something like this. He said, can you believe they've given me a project for $15 million to build a children's hospital? So I was like, wow, that project is for me. This is, this morning, hearing about this death. And then, then and there, I said, because he was going to throw the project away. He wanted $200, not $15 million. And I promise you, I didn't have the money, I was in a charity looking for used shoes, not for money. I wasn't in a good place for begging, but I just knew this project had to be for me. And it was the worst possible time because at that time I was on the board of directors for the New York City Marathon. And I had an Israeli friend called Shmuel who was backing me to start the Manhattan Marathon. And I was friends with Mayor Bloomberg. I was friends with Commissioner Kelly, the police of, and then I also organized the race in Central Park with 8,000 people. So I thought, how difficult to have 15,000 people running the Manhattan Marathon. And the previous New York City Marathon, I'd collected 12,000 pairs of shoes on the finishing line the day after. So I knew how I was going to start this Manhattan Marathon to get shoes for my Shoe4Africa, make money and be, it was just like the fantastic plan. I had all the finances, I had the mayor's backing, all these things. And now I was stuck at the crossroads. Do I build this huge, the first ever children's hospital in Eastern Central Africa? Or do I try and do the Manhattan Marathon, which actually was a formed company? My Israeli friend had formed the company to make it happen. So I chose philanthropy. So it wasn't a choice. It was just, I felt, like you say, driven. When you're in Kenya, something kind of eats at you and you make the choices for humanity more than the choices for your own personal benefit, I think.
Well, you talked here a little bit about purpose and like there was a reason why you had these things happen. And you also talked to us a little bit when we were at the school about the difference between if a child was diagnosed with cancer in the U.S., 10 kids were, got diagnosed with cancer. 9 of them would live in most likely situation, where it's the reverse in Kenya, where the same diagnosis, same diseases, you're going to have 1 kid survive and 9 kids die. And so I think that it probably, those types of decisions make it a little easier to get your priorities and be like, okay, I'll build a hospital if this is going to change things. Have you found that the quality of life since, getting these hospitals established has made a huge impact on that community?
Yeah, no, and I get so many stories. And one of the reasons why, it was compelling for me to build a children's hospital was I used to have a soccer team in the Nairobi slums. And one of my top scorers, she got AIDS. Nobody told me because they were scared to tell me, but she got worse and worse and worse. And then basically when she was on death's door, the team said, hey, listen, little Irene, blah, blah, blah. So I went to see her. On the second day that I visited Irene in the hospital bed, she kind of touched my arm when I was leaving and said, I like it when you come and visit me. And I thought, first of all, I was like, oh, how sweet. But then she continued and she said, I like it because the days that you come, they give me medicine. So I was outraged. I ran to the doctor. I was like, what on earth are you talking about? And the doctor said, listen, I have this much medicine for this amount of people. He says, I don't want to, I've been put in hard choices. I have to play God. I have to decide who gets medicines and who doesn't. And I have to think it from a critical point of view. Now, 2 years later, I was in Eldoret in the second largest hospital in Eldoret. I mean, in Kenya, sorry. And I met a street girl who I knew, and she was cradling a baby who had pneumonia, and she kept on slapping the face of the baby. And I was like, what are you doing? She says she has pneumonia. She keeps on passing out. And I've been here for 2 days. And I was enraged. I was like, come on, move the child to the front of the line. But she said, no, anytime that an adult comes into the waiting room, they're put in front. So again, I raced into the doctor's room. I'm like, what on earth is happening? Please help Louisa, my friend. She needs, and they said a very terrible thing it's not terrible because it's reality, but the doctor said, if I save an adult's life, that means 10 more orphans are not on the street. But he said, if I save a child's life, that means, so really, he didn't even finish the sentence. He just put that thought in my mind. And I suddenly realized, yes, I'm making these presumptions because I grew up, when I was 11 years old, I went to a public children's hospital. And I remember the glass doors opening because I broke every bone from my wrist to my shoulder. I fell out of the roof of a theater. But when I came into the hospital, doctors were running. This is the priority. Let's get this kid. So now I'm seeing the exact opposite. And even I have a famous running friend, Simon B. Watt, who was a champion runner. And so he has wealth. He said, when I took my child to the public hospitals, what happens is they don't even have syringes, for a baby child, because the hospital, again, has little money for resources. So it buys the adult syringes first. So it was almost like a reflection on my own life, seeing, okay, you got all these good steps through life. Yet here, this is the reality. And when I built the first hospital, we had a cancer ward on the top floor, 28 beds. But immediately we had 60 patients. And then I heard that quote that you are talking about, the fact of 90% of children who are diagnosed in sub-Saharan Africa die. So I did the maths and I looked in America and I found out that with American 90% surviving, 90% of those children are treated in children's cancer centers or hospitals. So I looked in sub-Saharan Africa, 0, not a single, private or public. And I thought it was everyone else's problem. So I came back to America. I told all my friends in cancer societies and, foundations and funds and donor advisory funds. I said, listen, this is a terrible problem. Do something. And then I heard from St. Jude's. It's the largest disparity today in global health, this stat. Right. And it kind of touched me, but I didn't do anything. And then one day we decided to build an AstroTurf soccer field next to the hospital because we want to get the patients out playing. And so Eliud Kipchoge was going to come and open the soccer field. And we got 10 kids to come and just be like little ambassadors from the hospital. And we asked the kids their names. Just say, my name is Johnny, blah, 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 and then step back. But instead, the children stepped forward, said their name, and then said their ailment. And fate, 9 out of those 10 children had cancer. So I was almost crying because I was thinking my whole team is going to disappear because these are the odds. And then I thought of that beautiful quote from JFK of, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? And I thought, I'm asking everyone else to build this cancer hospital. Why don't I do it myself? So I just decided then and there, I thought, okay, what's the worst I can do? I can fail, and then somebody else might take up, do the first layer of bricks and they can continue after that. But by doing nothing, I'm actually helping nobody. And why am I picking on everybody else, telling everybody else to help when I'm not even helping myself? So that's why I decided to build the cancer hospital, which is actually in construction now. We're on the 2nd of 4 floors. So it's 152 bed, coming soon.
So it's really inspiring what you're doing over there and how you've cared for the people. And when you go over there, I have to say the friendliness and the smiles on the kids' faces, it's infectious. Like I can see why you'd fall in love with the area and the people. It is a wonderful spot. The thing that I came away with, one was that I wanted to do something to help. And then 2, the other thing I came with is like, this is in an area where there's a spotlight to a certain degree by the global community because of the athletes. But I'm wondering how big the problem is in Africa and maybe in other parts of the world. And how do you not feel almost like hopeless or like you're not like, do you concentrate on the people that you know that you're helping and ignore the fact that there's all these people you can't reach, but at least you're helping these people. Like, how does that work out in your head?
Yeah, it's a very good question because, I'm making a drop in the ocean. Literally, I am. But in the other way, since we opened our General Children's Hospital, we've treated 1.3 million children in 10 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
when I think of that way, and then because I'm there, my office is on the ground floor, which is kind of tough because I hear a lot of the cries of the children. And sadly, it's the stories of the children that we lose more than the children that survive. But I'm reminded every single day because we have a load of patients leaving happy stories and they're so grateful. And they're grateful in the way, for instance, we're overcrowded in our hospital. We have 200 beds, but we have 240 inpatients. It's just because there is no other option. If they don't go to my option, they have to go to a general hospital where they'll have like a women's ward and the children will go into there. So you're completely right. And what I thought was, if I build one hospital, then maybe I will inspire somebody else to do the same because I don't have any qualifications. I left school when I was 15. So, I'm not an architect. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a real charity person. I was just somebody who saw a problem and said, let me try to fix it. And so I'm hoping that with my story that other people can say, I can also take this project. But I'll give you an example of how something very little can make a huge difference in Africa. One day, there was somebody who stopped by a school and saw a bunch of kids running. And one little boy was running well, so this stranger walked up and gave a banana to this kid and said, you're something special. Here, take this as a reward. That kid realized that he had some talent. So now, inspired by the banana, he started training more and became a double world champion. Abel Karui in the marathon. So all the time, there's these little acts that we don't even notice. And even the banana giver, maybe he didn't realize the implications of what he gave. In the same way, back in the early 2000s, we saw a boy in that stage. Nowadays we can give some school scholarships because we have money, but in those days we didn't have. So we saw this young boy, talented, couldn't go to school because he didn't have fees. So we gave him shoes and uniform and said, go and make your life. He became a world champion in the half marathon. He won the world championships, changed his community, changed his village. So these little things that we do, I think the problem is today with the internet is we all want to do something huge, but it's the little drops that make the difference. And when I'm making that little drop, somebody else is watching me and somebody else is feeling inspired to make the change. And that's how I look as a giant seesaw. We're moving in the right direction because every time people do these little acts of goodness, that person also has that instilled in themselves that they now want to go and help.
Well, you certainly did that with my visit to Kenya. I definitely left feeling differently about, pretty much the world. When I was leaving there, a lot of the places we visit are prepared for us as far as being spectacles, as far as major marathons where cities are cleaned up and you're presented with the best of what's available. To go and see Kenya and see this and kind of spend some time with you and the kids. And the kids were infectious as far as their smiles and just their just the personalities were great to see. And then to see what you're doing over there was really inspiring for us. I know that we're going to donate $1,000 towards Shoe4Africa. And we also we have a hat that we're selling on our thing. Then we're going to give $10 for every hat that's sold to Shoe4Africa. But I'm guessing there's other people in our audience, even though they didn't get to have the experience I had in front of you, maybe by listening to this podcast are inspired to do something to help. And, there's all sorts of charities that need funding and stuff like this. But what I really liked about what you're doing is it seemed like it was a direct main line to the people. It wasn't something that was going to be, like you said, sending people to Barbados for a retreat. What is the best way for people to go about donating to Shoe4Africa? Or if they don't have money, how can they help?
Well, like you, and I hope that you do come back. Maybe you can come back when we open the cancer hospital, and then I can take you around some of our other projects and you can see some things too. Like you, I really, really wish people would come and see, because the paradox of Kenya is you leave on the airport thinking like, whoa, I can't wait to see the lions and the giraffes and suddenly when you're in the country, you realize it's the people. And my explanation of this is the world used to be covered in water, and the oldest remnants of humankind have been found in northern Kenya, southern Ethiopia, along the Rift Valley. And I think we all feel a sense of coming home. So I urge anybody, and especially if you're a runner, you saw it. I mean, it's a runner's haven. Try to make the trip over there and come and see us. We're here. We'll be your tourist guides when you arrive. It's a very hospitable place. Kenyans love visitors. And also that's, once we start to see the things and start to see little things can make a difference. So yeah, go to shoe4africa.org if you see a little project that you want to, even if you want to send $10 and buy a box of pencils, I'll send you a picture of me giving the box of pencils to the school or something. And that is going to make a difference to that school. It's not every day. And that's why we love having visitors come to our club. These are kids. If I go to their school, the chances are they haven't had a visitor come for a long time. So we have to direct this kind of thing. And it's a win-win on both ways. I used to say with Shoe4Africa, the story was people would give me a shoe, but a shoe is very personal. They'd be saying, oh, I ran my 5K PR in this, And I would tell them this shoe is now going across like the donation from the donor to the destination. And then it's going to have a second life. Somebody on the other side is going to appreciate getting this shoe. Getting a secondhand gift I've seen tears come out of the eyes of women and children and male athletes too, when we've given them shoes because they're not used to this. I mean, we give presents at our hospital each year, and most of the kids that we give presents to at Christmas, they've never had a Christmas gift before. So something very little can make the biggest difference. So yeah, get in touch, do something little, and it's going to have a big impact.
Okay, so Shoe4Africa, and it's shoe, not plural, shoe, one shoe, 4africa.org. You can go there, send your donation, and I'm sure it also has information for sending shoes if you want to donate shoes. Anything else that people can do to help out the mission?
Spread the word. I mean, for me, I always think that 9 out of 10 should be, like if that was happening in America, 9 out of 10 children were dying. I always say, well, we're waiting for 10 out of 10. Spread the word of, it should be African. St. Jude's has 88% recognition. If you walk down the streets of New York and ask, 100 people, 88 people know about St. Jude's and pediatric cancers in America. In Africa, it's like a hidden factor. Absolutely no information is so it's like on planet Mars. And so that's my goal that I want to do now is raise awareness. We have so many patients there that I'm thinking, okay, we can do research. Maybe we find the cure for, some form of pediatric cancer or something like this. So if anybody's got any medical knowledge or anybody gets inspired or by this thought, get in touch also. I think then, we have other ways to get help. We have a team in the New York City Marathon. We're full this year, but, we have fundraisers that run for us in the major city marathons and things. Or just run a race in Chicago and just put on a Shoe4Africa t-shirt and just, raise more than the t-shirt costs. And I'm happy.
All right. Well, I have to say, what you're doing, I was really impressed. Obviously, I've seen and been around charities before, and what you're doing, I think, is just something special. The fact that it's not staying in like a box and seeing there's pain over here, but this is our charity mission, and I'm not going to help over there. Yours is more like, hey, whatever we got to do to help this community. And it was really inspiring. And I just want to say thank you to you and thank you to Kip Run for giving us the experience over there to see it. So the 42 house at Kip Run was the conduit for me to meet you, Toby. And I really appreciate that they brought us over there and I was able to see something as meaningful as what you're doing for Shoe4Africa and for the people there. So thank you for your service to the people of E10.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I enjoyed talking to you. And like you, I believe in the run.
That's awesome.
Give a good stretch, got my laces tied. My trusty podcast by my side. If you want to talk fun, it's the place to be. Yeah, it's the drop, D-R-O-P.